Okay, welcome everyone to the Stoa. My name is Alex Burok. I'm an executive coach and advisor and friend of Peter. And I think a couple months back, I shared with him Ted's model, and we, both kind of got excited about it and set this up. So I'll be hosting the session today. Um, for those who I imagine most of you are familiar, there'll be maybe 20, 30 minutes of Ted presenting and sharing kind of his model, his work, and then we'll switch over to Q&A. Please kind of drop questions as they arise in the chat, and we'll look at those, as we're doing the Q&A portion. Um, yeah, anything I'm missing, Peter? Is that good to kind of intro Ted now? Okay, cool. So I'm going to read a sort of a truncated piece of Ted's bio just to give a little bit of an orientation to him and his work in the world. So Ted Strauss is a master spiritual guide, author, co-creator of the iConscious model, which we'll be looking at today, and trainer to over 100 spiritual coaches. His life work is devoted to accelerating personal development, helping individuals awaken to infinite consciousness, heal old conditioning, and fully embody their uniqueness. Ted helps seekers who are ready for a deeply integrated path that embraces awakening, embodiment, relational depth, and fulfillment of purpose. What sets Ted apart is his ability to get results. His work developing the iConscious model of human development, along with his deep experience in meditation, Enneagram, and human design, gives him the unique ability to pinpoint a client's developmental locations and illuminate the most direct path to the next stage. Clients who have spent decades meditating and doing practices come to TED for rapid, deep, and permanent awakenings. Beyond that, TED helps clients make life-changing shifts, integrating and expressing their gifts in the world. And speaking on that, I think this is something that drew me to the model and how I came to know TED and working kind of through a series of conversations. I really think that is unique about him and this model is a way of uh, yeah, kind of pinpointing where you are, because I assume everyone who joins a call like this is kind of on some version of a path of unfoldment and probably can experience, in your own experience, it can be confusing and disorienting, and there's a lot of conflicting ideas and messages. And I think it's really great to find people like Ted who can play that role of guide and sort of help orient us and just find the next step without maybe having to know how it all fits together. So anyway, that's Ted. Excited to hear from him. And again, any questions, kind of drop them in the chat. So I'll pass it over to you, Ted.
Thanks. Thanks to you both. Thanks, Peter, for inviting me in, and thanks, Alex, for playing host today. Yeah, this is fun for me. This is what my life is about. This is what turns me on. How do we awaken as directly as possible? And why does that matter? So to me, this matters more than anything else in my world, and I don't see anything in the world mattering more than this. Dr. Griggs and I, when we were starting to put this together 10 years ago, we pointed out that in a white paper we wrote back then, we pointed out that there was abundant evidence for the fact that higher stage of development, both personally and socially, are directly correlated with more positive outcomes, personally and socially. So in other words, the more developed we are, the more positive outcomes, health outcomes, relationship outcomes, work outcomes, environmental outcomes. Development is a good thing. So the less developed we are, the more dysfunctional and challenged we are. We're not yet functional, as much functional as we can become. And we also see all kinds of lamentable evidence for the impact of dysfunctional leadership and lack of development. The current political environment is rife with this. Everybody I talk to is very upset by the apparent stupidities at the head of government. And I'm not one of these people who gets all divided about that stuff. I'm not really against anything because I see this as part of humanity's larger evolutionary trajectories. I see that society is where it is. Our leaders are reflecting the people, and all of this is part of how humanity is growing. But it's really clear that we are needing to grow quickly now. I mean, because our technology is growing quickly, and the horribly negative impacts of that technology are growing very quickly. And this is the thing that actually started waking me up a long time ago. When I was in my teens, it was really obvious to me that we are heading for a technological singularity, in a sense, that we're moving toward a knee of the curve where our capacities are exploding, and yet our maturity is not. So you see, there's sort of, the maturity curve is going up really slow. If it's going up, it is going up, I think. But uh, the challenge curve is going up way faster. So to me, there is nothing more crucial on this planet than getting as many of us as awake as possible, as quickly as possible. That's what motivates me. That's what turns me on. So, what can we do about that? How can we speed up the awakening process? Well, for me, it's really obvious that in order to do that, number one, what is it? What is the awakening process? And this reminds me of an old magazine that popped up years ago, I don't know, 20 years ago or more than that, called What is Enlightenment? And they were exploring all kinds of topics around that. So there's a certain way in which my life has been around, at least in part, answering that question. Technically, specifically, what is it? I've been in this awakening work since I was 13. I'm 71. So it's been a long time. I've seen everything. Maybe not everything. But the point is, there's a lot of ways in which the awakening process is rather stalled. Yes, there's ways also in which it has greatly expanded. There are luminaries out there that have caused wonderful, huge growth spurts of all kinds. I mean, one of my old teachers, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, um, despite despite some questions I have about his personal character, um, there's no doubt that he made meditation very mainstream. And things like that have been going on for a long time. And yet, one of the things I started noticing back in the early 2000s and even before that was that there is a particular set of beliefs that are out there that are a legacy from thousands of years of spiritual traditions and therefore are very revered, very respected, and very important, and yet contain some core ideas that really get in the way. And that is what I call the myths of enlightenment. And that is a book that I'm working on. And I'm working on that book in episodes that I'm posting on my website at tedstrauss.com. And I invite you all to just go start reading that stuff. Um, this is all part of my lifelong campaign to help the world awaken as quickly as possible. So the iConscious model of human development was developed by myself and Dr. Carol Griggs back around 2015, 16, 17, specifically to speed up personal development and create foundational models and tools and assessments that would help, especially coaches and individuals, successfully awaken their whole being, not just their consciousness. That's one of the myths. It's not just about consciousness. It's all this. It's all of a piece. This is holism. Um, But it's becoming more obvious to me that one of the major sub goals of that whole endeavor is to reveal these myths, is to look at them in the face and to figure out how it is that they're getting in the way and how to step around them. That's all. Just practical. Let's get around these detours. So, what I'm going to do is give you a little overview to the iConscious model and talk about a few of the myths that are inherent in the overview, or like how the overview addresses those myths. And then we'll get into the 14 stages that the model talks about. I'm not going to spend much time on the 5 domains. I'll mention them. And I'm not going to spend much time on the 4 views. I'll mention them because we don't have that much time anyway. So I'll just do what I can here. Um, so what I'm going to do is put the, oops, I'm going to put the chart up here. Share that. Come on. Okay. Now I'm gonna give me a moment here because I want to be able to see my own notes as well. So first of all, I'm showing on this chart just two of the three dimensions of the model. If you wanted to, you could make models of human development have as many dimensions as you want. However, I find it's more effective to have as few dimensions as possible to get the ideas across clearly. So the fewest dimensions I want to focus on today are the left-hand dimensions of what I call the 5 domains: consciousness, uniqueness, mind, emotions, and body. These are essentially the 5 layers of our personal self. Well, personal and impersonal. So transpersonal. So consciousness is the transpersonal level of ourself. Uniqueness is sort of the seed. It's like our soul. What's different? What's unique about us? Why are we here? And then we've got mind, emotions, and body. What's simple about this is everybody knows these are all parts of who we are. There's no doubt or question about that. We don't have to have any arguments about it. And when you start thinking about development in terms of what happens on these 5 levels of our being as we're growing, this starts helping us to understand what it means to grow in an integrated way. And that's part of our objective in creating this chart. We want to show that growth happens most directly when it's integrated. It's actually one of the major myths of enlightenment is it's all about consciousness. And if you do just the right thing, consciousness will blow open, it'll fix everything. Your life will be, the growth, you'll be at the peak of your growth and you can start your guru working career. It's just kind of silly because it doesn't happen like that at all. Even the people who have these blowout consciousness experiences, it does not suddenly develop them in the other 5 domains. This is a myth. This is why a lot of these teachers who have had major consciousness blowout experiences then go on to create all kinds of problems and violences in their sanghas, because they're not, in fact, developed on these other levels necessarily just because they awoke to consciousness. So these 5 domains are very important pieces of who we are and need to be considered as part of the whole being awakening process in order to speed things up. Then we look at the stages to the right, 1 through 14 plus stage 15, which we've called unknown. This is another myth we're trying to bust. It's the myth that once you reach whatever the guru says is the top stage, that's it. You've got there. You're there. It's over. Growth is done. Well, that's nuts. We're part of evolution. We're part of life. Life is evolution. Evolution and change is endless. There's no end to growth. There never will be an end to growth. So we're commemorating that by saying stage 15 is unknown. And once we figure out what's beyond stage 14, and we can reliably assess for it, then that will become stage 15, and 16 will become unknown. That's sort of the way I'm looking at this whole thing. It's not going to end. There is a 3rd dimension in our model called views, which is essentially a slightly modified version of Wilber's 4 quadrants, which is also terribly important and also busts some more spiritual myths. One of the spiritual myths that busts is that it's all about subjective illumination. Enlightenment is all about just what's going on inside of you. Well, if it's just purely subjective, what about your relationships? Is that purely subjective? I don't think so. I think, Wilber properly pointed out that this is a larger sphere of engagement, not just subjective. And what about our relationship with society? an even bigger sphere of engagement that needs to be considered. If we are placing ourselves, if we are isolating ourselves relative to other people and society, as it turns out, our awakening does not happen as quickly as it does if we are more integrated in the views. This is my experience, because then you got a bunch of spiritual warriors like going it alone, which is kind of what was going on when I was, back in the 80s. There's a lot of that going on. Then you also had the groups of people who were like, no, we're all going to do it together. But then it's got to be both. That's what I'm saying. It's got to be both. Yes, there's work we need to do individually. There's work we need to do in relationship, and there's work we need to do in relation to society. All of this speeds up personal development. It isn't isolated. Um, so I think that's it for the overview. Um, I'm just, you know what, Alex, just let me know when any questions might show up. Feel free to post any questions you want. I'm just going to start heading into the stages because I think it's really important to understand how we grow and how these stages tend to give rise to these myths of enlightenment that get in the way of our growth. So, stage one, survival. This is describing from conception to birth and through birth. So, in stage one, in whatever ways it felt like our survival was at stake, we become primed for the belief that there was something wrong with us. We have to defend ourselves. If I'm not being cared for by my parents, there must be something wrong with me, is what most people, not everybody, but it's what most people tend to conclude from that. And this belief that we're born into some sort of lowly, sinful, or undeserving state, uh, and that gives rise to this myth that we have to earn our way into God's love, read parents' love, or into unity with divine being, read belonging in the family, in order to be happy. And yes, we do need to feel like we belong on this planet and with other people in order to be happy. That's true. And so because that's true, we go about desperately trying to belong if we didn't get it in childhood. And as we grow up into our teens, we find ourselves templating on people who promise to make us feel that way, one way or the other. And if there's a religion or a spiritual ism that's saying, you're going to belong, just come here and fix yourself, make yourself more worthy, and you will then become eligible to enter the kingdom of heaven, one way or another. Many variations on this kind of talk. So the idea is that the myth of enlightenment is that by purifying your body, your mind, your spirit, your soul, whatever, you earn the right into enlightenment. The problem is we are not separate. We're already not separate. We're not, I mean, it's kind of like the myth that says everybody's already enlightened, but I don't go with that because even though it's true that we're already living in union, we don't know it until we know it. That's what awakening process is about. It's the process of the evolution of our perception of what's going on because the world is already in unity. And so this problem of like having to purify ourselves in order to be eligible, gets in the way of us recognizing that we're already in union. Because these further stages of development, a lot of it isn't about creating something new. It's about realizing something that's already true about yourself, about consciousness, about our relationship with the world. So, stage one sets us up to realize that actually we do need to survive, and there are things we may need to do to take care of ourselves. That's a good thing. We need that. Stage two, self-centric. If when you were young, your parents didn't encourage you to be self-centric, then you end up centered on other people. This is a bad thing, a really bad thing. We're not here to be center ourselves on other people's truth and reality and view of the world. We're here to live our own and to embody our own truth and our own gifts and our own perception. It doesn't mean we're not open to everybody else's. It just means we're living our life, not theirs. So being self-centered is incredibly important. Now, in stage two, when we're very young, if our parents are like, dude, it's not about you, you're here to serve us, which I got, my mom really actually treated me like a slave. It was really pretty weird. Um, then it's easy to grow up feeling like, okay, well, if it's not about me, then when it comes to spirituality, I'll just get rid of my small self. It's not about me anyway. I'll just give service, endlessly give service. Maybe if I log 10,000 hours of service, I'll be eligible for enlightenment. Maybe if I log 100,000 hours of service, I'll be eligible for enlightenment. Unfortunately, none of these things are actually true like that. It doesn't mean that there's nothing good about it. It just means that there needs to be the proper balance about it, about everything. So self-centric, we get through stage two one way or the other. Being impulsive, having our parents have their own reactions. And sooner or later, we realize it's not okay to just do whatever the heck I want. I actually have to conform to some degree to what my family is, how my family is being, how they're living, how they want me to live. If I want to get the nurturance of belonging to this family. Otherwise, I'm kind of out in the cold. And so the need to conform is a biological necessity when we're growing up, especially because we're still not ready to fend for ourselves. Now, stage three, the conforming stage, if you were wounded in any way in your attempts to conform to your parents' ways of being human, perhaps because you didn't really want to conform to being like that, that's how it was for me. Um, then it sets you up for the myth that's about conforming instead of following your own instructions again. This is important because enlightenment isn't about becoming selfless, homogenized, completely grateful at all moments, having no negative emotions. This is not what is going on. That is not enlightenment, and it's not going to bring anybody happiness, even subjectively. That doesn't even work. So one way or the other, we conform as much as we need to. And at somewheres around, late teens, we start, hopefully launching ourselves separately out into the world. Maybe we get our own place. Maybe we get our own job, whatever. But we start trying to act like an adult. And while we're doing that, our mind is still growing. And while we're in this stage of stage four, which we call rational striving, the tendency is to be extremely centered in our mind, run by our mind, believing our mind is who we are, um, making decisions from our mind. All of this we learn lessons about. We are not our mind. We are not our beliefs. Uh, Making decisions from our head generally is a bad idea, and things like that. So, what are some of the myths associated with this? Well, first, stage four also tends to be a very sort of materialistic stage. This is when we need to be materialistic. We're trying to create a life for ourselves. So we need resources. We need to generate money. We need to buy our own food, stuff like that. So there's nothing, by the way, nothing wrong with any of these stages. Perfectly natural, all for our own support. Um, but a lot of what happens is we're running our lives by sort of hyper-masculine will from our mind. And the result of that is we start having these myths like, well, enlightenment is all about doing the extreme things that are really going to bust through all the barriers. Um, Lots of people have died that way, but looks cool. And all kinds of extremes happen. Like we get these ideas that we're supposed to be meditating on the top of a Himalayan mountain for decades in order to really be in union with the divine. That was a really old one, but I'm playing all of these pictures because it's important to see them. Um, the myth, yeah, so that's part of the myth of extremism being the thing that will get us into enlightenment. There's also kind of a corresponding myth, not just of hypermasculine effort, but of hyperfeminine effort. If we do absolutely nothing, if we just allow, if we just receive grace, if we just feel everything, if we're just being, well, I'm here to say that you need both. One of the things that speeds up awakening the fastest is the balance of masculine and feminine, yin, yang. When you get too extreme on either end, the awakening process slows down. So next, stage 5, equality harmony. The need to find social harmony so we can fit in society, have the relationships we need to have, and do the work, get our work out and have people receive it. So we need to go through this stage of socializing with the larger, groups around us. And yet, the tendency here at stage 5, so the difference between stage 4 and stage 5 is stage 4 is fundamentally a sort of materialistic, outward looking stage where we're sort of working on the outsides of our life. But when you get to the end of stage 4, you start feeling like, I've got all these, I've got a bunch of outsides working, or I've tried a lot and I couldn't get that much working, whatever. One way or the other, you get to this place where it's like, it doesn't matter what I did on the outside. I, Something's wrong on the inside. I need to work on the inside. So then people start turning inside. This is stage 5. And they start at first tending to apply hypermasculine or hyperfeminine approaches to self-development. But sooner or later, we come to an edge I'll describe in a moment. Well, during this stage 5, one of the myths is that our uniqueness needs to be repressed. I mentioned that earlier. It's like enlightenment has the following positive qualities to it: kindness, compassion, generosity, endless care for all beings. I'm not saying that's not true. I'm just saying that's certainly not all that's true. Everybody, no matter how developed they are, has all of the human emotions. We just maintain, the more we grow, the more we maintain the bigger picture of all of who we are, not just these little parts. And when we get challenged, less and less we get reduced to these little parts. The myth that we should not speak our truth if it differs from group mind, this comes up in all kinds of early stage spiritual explorations. It's like, I want to be in harmony with this group, so I don't want to start asking all kinds of questions that may sound really cynical or obvious. Like, hey, if this group is so enlightened, how come so many people are getting raped in the background? Well, we're trained not to ask questions like that, especially if we want to be accepted, in a spiritual society or any kind of society. Stage 6. So that what happens is that toward the end of stage 5, we're doing our work, we're starting to explore what's going on in our inner self, find the parts of ourselves that we were needing to find. We get to this place where we start recognizing that discomfort is a major issue. And really, this issue of how we relate to discomfort is what divides what I call the sort of idealized awakening paths from the embodied awakening path. The embodied awakening path means, oh, I have to accept that there's discomfort. Not only I have to accept it, but I actually want to feel it. Because when I try not feeling discomfort, my life goes to hell. But you don't really realize that until you get toward the end of stage 5. It's a decay. We have sometimes called it the rot. It's a it only happens when you get to the point where you have followed all of your idealism in your life, in your spiritual life, in your development life, whatever, to the point where you start seeing that the ideals themselves are not real, that your own idealism about yourself is not real. And if you want real, you're going to have to feel what's really here. And not just have to feel it. At some point, you start realizing, I want to feel it. I want to know what's going on in here. Because when I avoid feeling the things that are difficult, the things that matter, well, first of all, I spend all my time in avoidance. If we're doing that, you can see how this works. The mind starts organizing itself in ways to keep you distracted from uncomfortable feelings. You start arranging your relationships to keep you isolated from uncomfortable feelings and conversations. You take jobs that don't challenge you in ways around these issues, etc. Nothing's wrong. It's all good. It's all how we grow. We have to go through this stage. We have to recognize that it's time to let ourselves not just wake up, but wake all the way down into our bodies, into this incarnation on Earth. When we do that, we enter a completely new stage of awakening that's way faster in development speed than anything that happened before that. Why? Because we're suddenly not excluding anything that's true. We're just being, we're letting ourselves feel and encounter the truth of what is. This is awakening. This is embodied awakening. It wakes us up to all of our gifts and also all of our limits. We have to accept that we have both gifts and limits. When you get both gifts and limits, you know how to fulfill your purpose without spending your life running away from stuff. So, as we start getting this, we're dropping into stage 6, which we call inclusive. And here's where we start growing beyond conventional worldviews. Um, for instance, a conventional worldview is if you're in physical pain, take medicine. You don't have to be in pain. How's that working out? Not good. It's not working out good at all. It's working out really badly. This is, a perfect analogy for what happens spiritually. When we're constantly taking spiritual pills to try and make ourselves feel better and simulate happiness instead of just being how we are, things don't go well and they slow down. When we go in the other direction and we allow ourselves the truth of what we're feeling, things speed up. And part of the myth here is that enlightenment is about happiness. Enlightenment isn't about just happiness. Enlightenment is about awakening to the full truth of who we are and what the world is, and living our full gifts and giving our gifts, embodying, actualizing our realizations. Which brings up another myth that I like to talk about, which is the myth that we're just here to be awake. We're not here to be awake any more than we're here to be awake when we get up in the morning. We're not awake to be awake. We're awake to get up and go do our lives. We become spiritually awake to go do our lives. Same thing. So, and people get this when they go through the embodied awakening process. They rapidly get to places where it's like, oh, right, I'm here to be me. I'm here to bring my gifts. And then we just forget about it. At some point, you let go of all the spiritual identities and you're just here to be you. That's it. You're just being you. Stage 7. So as we go through stage 6 and we start more and more deeply embracing the fact that, yeah, there's happiness, there's sometimes bliss, there's consciousness realization, and there's all kinds of emotional challenges and feelings. There's endless physical challenges and relationship challenges and work challenges. Stage 7 isn't just about awakening consciousness. It's about awakening the infinite in all of who we are. It's about recognizing that the world, our own world, isn't split between the higher part and the lower self. It's like we need to recognize the infinite in our body, in our emotions, in our mind, in our soul and in our consciousness. This is what happens in stage 7. And the more we're willing to come down and be human, the more the awakening consciousness comes down with us, and we realize that it's already infused in everything that we are. Stage 8, oscillating. This is where our attachment to exclusive identification with consciousness is intentionally shaken by our own being or the universe. Our own being is basically saying, it's not just about consciousness. Let yourself move between consciousness and physical awareness, emotional awareness, relational awareness. All of that is necessary. And the more we let ourselves move, the more we start busting this myth that awakening is sort of an all or nothing phenomenon. It's not an all or nothing phenomenon. It's a constantly developing phenomenon on all levels of our being. So if we think that it's just this sudden blowout thing, I'm just going to go on a retreat and have this blowout thing, and that's it, I'll get there. And then you come home and then you oscillate back into feeling much smaller and much more reduced to your humanness. Um, so I'm here to say there's nothing wrong with any of that. That's just part of the natural process of harmonizing our whole being to the point where we realize that all of these aspects of ourselves are aspects of the one thing that we are, unity consciousness. And along the way, we have to accept that both being infinite and finite have an uncomfortable feeling to it, at least at this stage. At this stage, we are highly aware that there's a strange paradox about being both at the same time. And it seems like we can't be both at the same. Like, how do oil and water to go together? They don't go together. When you're having your beautiful spiritual illumination experience, what does that got to do with like having a fight with your girlfriend, or having to fight for a bonus at the job, or dragging yourself through traffic every day to get to work, or whatever? Well, the answer is everything. It has everything to do with all of that. But as long as we're thinking of it in separate silos, then we run into problems that actually slow down our awakening process. So we allow this in stage 8, we learn to allow these oscillations to happen and to recognize that it's not just one or the other, it's both at the same time, more and more. And the both at the same time has a feeling about it. And the feeling is kind of weird and paradoxical and woundy. We've sometimes called it core wound, core paradox. It's hard to find the right words. But you get to this place where it's like, oh, that's me. And then you drop in. And that's unity consciousness. You accept that the totality is who you are, and you start living that. That's stage 9. One of the myths, as I alluded to earlier, is that a massive shift like unity consciousness, which sometimes comes for some people kind of with high contrast, and other people with low contrast because they're more integrated and going a little more gradually, in a sense, which I find more sustainable, by the way. One of the myths is that these blowout awakenings like that, or some kind of a major unity awakening, that's the end. It's not the end. In fact, it's only the beginning, which is why in the earlier days of this work that I've been involved with, we would call it second birth, because it felt like a birth, a whole new start. So we bust through the myths that we have arrived and this is the end of the process. And we have to grapple with the fact that, oh my God, not only is it not the end of the process, but I got all kinds of shit going on in here. This is not all worked out. Yeah, I get that I'm in unity with the universe, and that all of my domains, my mind, my body, my emotions, my relationships, it's all consciousness, it's all part of the same thing, and I am the one thing. But just because you're illuminated as the one thing doesn't mean you've worked out all your stuff. It just doesn't. You then start realizing, oh my God, I get it at the core. I'm living this at the core, but I'm not living it in my day-to-day interactions in the world with other people. I'm still acting as if I'm separate, basically. I'm still doing transactions as if we are two separate people. So then your whole life has to be rearranged on the basis of this fundamental realization of unity consciousness. So this myth of, the pinnacle of of unity consciousness gets busted, and we find ourselves rather at times very uncomfortably descending into healing episodes that can be rather, some shocking, some difficult, but ultimately deeply integrated in a really good way. So we find ourselves starting to move through into and through stage 10, transforming. One of the myths there is that enlightenment resolves all the wounds and issues, which we already busted, and that the person becomes perfect. That is so not true. What would that even mean? Who gets to say what perfect is? So it doesn't really have much meaning. Stage 11, individuating. The myth is that we're here to be awake. I brought that earlier, but I'm here to say no. And when you get to stage 11, this Gnostic Gospels quote starts really making sense. That which is within you, if you don't bring it forward, what's within you, it will destroy you. And it's really true. Because, oh my God, we spent our whole lives surviving birth, going through, elementary school, middle school, college, all the stages of development we've talked about so far. And we finally get to the place where we feel healed, fundamentally healed, late in stage 10. But if we're believing that that was the end of the line, and that, oh, I'm here now what? Nothing, I guess. Just be. No, then that's the biggest tragedy, because then we're not actually actualizing this being that was here to be awake. Yeah, we got the awakeness, but now we got to actually go do it. And that's what we start getting in stage 11. It's like, oh, right, I'm not here to just be awake. So what am I here to do? So stage 11 is your own personal clarification and answer to that question. The universe provides you with endless opportunities to sort out what are your unique, like, what is to be done that only I can do? That's a question that you can ask yourselves that will help. As you get that you've got your gifts that need to come here, there's still some fear. Oh my God, if I bring my gifts, I'm going to get crucified. Where'd this idea come from? Well, Jesus didn't have a very easy time of it. So that's one of the places this came from. Um, we don't really have a lot of very positive influences about uh, the template of spiritual illuminaries that are really deeply integrated. We got a lot of people who are illumined, but not deeply integrated, and other people who appear kind of integrated, not necessarily so spiritually illumined. Um, but when you get to this place where you're in an embodied awakening and you get what you're here for, then stage 12 is, you know what? I don't care what the fears are about what happens if I do what I'm here to do. I have to do it, because if I don't do it, I suffer, and the people around me are suffering. I see that every day. I'm here to do something to help. So that's what stage 12 is about. And by the way, I brought this chart years ago to a group of spiritual coaches. And one of the big questions at the end, one of the big comments at the end was, it looks like you're connecting spiritual growth with personal development growth. Is that what this is? And I'm like, absolutely. What's the point of the spiritual development if it doesn't lead to that? And that person said, I ain't touching that. Nope, not going there. And I think that's part of the problem. Anyway, um, stage 13, singular realization. So what's happening up here? We're doing our thing in stage 12. We're just being ourselves. we kind of can't be stopped. We're certainly not stopping ourselves. And if the world tries to stop us, we're just flowing around them, doing our thing. And then while we're in stage 12, the universe starts giving us a series of challenges about letting go of identities. People who've been involved with spiritual work for a long time, letting go of spiritual identities. People who think that they're the greatest physicist in the world, maybe they're not. Whatever the thing is, it's like the universe starts taking stuff away, taking away identities. Why? Because really all the identities are attempts to make ourselves feel more secure in things that are familiar. But that's not living in the mystery of life. Living in the mystery of life is letting go of all of the attempts to buffer and control what we experience because we're afraid we might get overwhelmed or we might die. So the universe starts giving us a series of these challenges. And one where is, over a series of these, our identities dissolve and we find ourselves just living without those old identities. It's easier to say what it's not, which is why the word non-dual comes in here. I try the word singular. I use the word singular. It just means that you know that there's no, not only that there's no division, you got that at the unified stage realization. You know that you're unified, but you at singular, there's nothing in you that's trying to stop life from being what it is. Nothing. You're just being, just like life is being. You're just being. So that's singular realization. And there's all kinds of myths about, the ego death and stuff like that. Well, actually, this is one myth that's true. The ego can be thought of as the part of us that's trying to keep us safe. And it's not that we stop trying to keep ourselves safe. It's that we just start realizing that our own personal mental intentions to keep ourselves safe aren't going to do it. We start realizing that that's what the universe does for us. Not always. It'll kick us in the ass when we need to be kicked in the ass. But fundamentally, we can have faith that the universe has this worked out. We can do our thing, and we don't have to be spending all our time figuring out how to deal with everything that can go wrong, which keeps us in control and not in this stage 14 of flow. So, stage 14, one of the myths here is that flow is a temporary state of unusual absorption in enjoyable experience. Well, I'm here to say, and I might be the first person to say, flow is a stage, 24/7 lived experience that happens when you go even beyond just the realization that that I'm just an aspect of the universe doing my thing. That's it. No more holdbacks. Just being me. Um, then you get to live that all the time. And I want that for everybody. I want that for the whole world. And I want us to all get to a place where we go way beyond that, where it's mutual flow, mutual cooperative flow. Not saying there's never any competition or anything like that. The universe, the world would never become ideal, but we can live like that. And that's what the iConscious model and the busting of myths of enlightenment is all about for me. So I think I'll stop and see what questions arise.
Excellent. Thank you, Ted. Yeah, really great to hear you go through it at the level of detail. Um, yeah, I think I'll probably pivot quickly to others because I don't have any burning questions, and I saw some really strong ones in the chat. So I think I may jump in with something, but I think I'll just pass it over to Peter to kind of run the Q&A portion.
Oh, great.
Thank you, Ted.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alice, and thanks, Ted, for that excellent presentation. It was awesome to get that download. Um, so we have some wonderful questions, and uh, are you okay to be here for like a 90 minutes in total? So like a 30 more minutes, Ted? Yeah, cool. So if you have to slip out, everyone, feel free to slip out at the top of the hour, but we're here for 90 minutes. And I'll ask two questions. I got something burning. Um, and so I'll read, put my question in the chat. So I'll read the one out. So I'm presently the philosopher in residence at the AI Collective, and the segment of the AI community, kind of known as rationalists or self-optimists. I would pattern match them at the fourth stage, the rational striving stage. And being a philosopher in residence with this group, which is the largest AI group in the world, feels like an important responsibility. Um, so the question is, how might I help this community or this segment of the community move beyond the stage? And what do you think causes people to get stuck in it?
The stuckness is about not recognizing the pain of focusing too much on the outside. Like we can spend our whole lives improving, trying to do things on the outside of the world, but as a, the do good approach ends up doing a lot of bad if we're not aware of the actual impacts we're having. So it's not enough to just be looking at the outsides of things. We have to be feeling the impact we're having on our own insides and on the insides of everybody around us as well. Um, yeah, when somebody comes to me wanting personal, the acceleration of their personal development and awakening process, the very first place I go with every single person is, what is your relationship with discomfort? Because as long as we're trying to endlessly fix discomfort or fix ourselves when we're having discomfort or avoid it or anything like that, whatever the endeavor, it's going to fail. It's going to fail. It's okay. It's going to, let's just say more accurately, it's going to partly succeed and partly fail. And it's when we're blinded to the fail parts that we get stuck. When we become aware that something is not, not fully right here, that's when we can move forward and start to address things in a more sober way. So I don't know anything about this group. Is this artificial intelligence group, trying to, is that what this is about? Trying to make some rules that keep us safe or what?
Well, there's a group surrounding the AI conversation. So people who are interested in AI, who are creating it, who are, involved in that scene. And a big segment of them are sort of like in that rational striver phase. And what came up there when you just shared, it kind of feels like there's going to be, and I'm already seeing this with some of them, is that like it's hard to set a goal, you know what I mean, for what AI should be or for their own lives with the massive complexity that's arising. And then that's eventually going to meet them with these uncomfortable emotions. And so that's an opportunity to kind of like be with them and have sort of a more of a relational process, which is my intuition of where to help take this group.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and so my other question,
Before we go beyond that, I've been very involved in artificial intelligence and awakening ever since well, actually, back in 2000, I was trying to build an AI engine that would help people awaken. Didn't succeed. Ruby on Rails was messy. So on to the next thing. The next thing was the Loving AI project, uh, like 9 years ago. We borrowed Sophia, the famous robot from Hanson Robotics, and trained her to be an awakening coach using our model. And the results were astonishing. And it was kind of dumb back then, but it was early AI stuff. That got me really interested seeing some of the results we got from back then. And so I've been highly involved with generating my own AI agents in the last year and a half. And I got to the point where I realized it's not doing what I want. It's not going to do what I want. I have to build my own platform. So we're building our own platform. And it's the only way I think I can ultimately impact the entire world at scale. I have to, I'm building apps that are designed to awaken people without them even knowing what we're doing. They're just going to enjoy the process and become more awake. So that's the kind of thinking I want to encourage.
mhm. Um, and somewhat related is my other question. I'll just read it out. So the iConscious framework, from my understanding, while developmental and multidimensional, seems to be orientated from the perspective of the individual. So I'm curious, first, do you think that's a fair way to put it? And then second, do you see the 15th stage as pointing towards a kind of collective consciousness, like the idea the next Buddha is the Sangha, or as I like to say, the next sage is the Stoa?
Ah, excuse me. Yeah, great question. First of all, very observant about the chart. The chart is shown in subjective mode. The chart actually has four modes, um, somewhere buried on an old website, where you could click any of those four views and all of the words change to those views. So that's just a way to understand the third dimension of the views. Um, right. There are descriptions in each stage of the view, subjective view, relational view, and all of the views. So what else to say? So yes, it does. It clearly is taking us, this whole awakening process is taking us into all kinds of forms of uh, mutual cooperation, social awakening, group awakening in entities, group entities. Like it's not enough to just be awake as an individual person. My wife and I started noticing that we went through a stage of awakening into the unity of the entity of our relationship. And then I started noticing some small groups going into spaces like that. Occasionally, larger groups can go into certain small spaces like that are limited in scope, one way to say it. But I think we're heading in the direction where many channels, many people, many reasons for getting together are all going to become part of a larger singularities, multiple singularities with more and more overlaps. If that's, I think that's what you were alluding to, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so there's like I see there's subjective, observable, relational, and systematic or systemic kind of views that you would toggle between. Cool, cool. Yeah, we'll
Yeah,
hopefully,
we need to have them all, right? That's whole being awakening. I call it whole being awakening. Um,
right.
when we can have access to all of the views and all of the domains, um, and we're living at advanced stages, we have access to all of these things. And it doesn't mean we're perfect or, you're not going to match anybody's ideas of enlightenment, but we can finally be fully who we are in relation to others. Because what we do, nobody's out of relationship to others. Yeah.
So we'll do some Q&A. We got some awesome questions. Alex, and feel free to ask a follow-up question, but Alex, you're up first.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Ted. Your model seems to be more detailed than a lot of other models I've seen. But one thing is, like so many of these models, it seems very linear. Like it's one stage after the other. But what I've observed is that some people are operating at very high levels of cognitive and strategic complexity, even flow states in many domains, but they remain stuck in their ego in stage two, like a very survival type of selfish ego whereas in all the other domains, they're very high level. And it looks like they're even like dark magicians. And you can see this in politicians and business leaders. They are very good at manipulating others for their own benefit, but they're operating at very high levels. And another thing I see is that around stages 7 to 10, there are other types of shadows that can emerge, like nihilism and solipsism. So after you achieve awakening, you might say, well, it's it's nothing's real anyway, or I am everything and I am all, and you get stuck in these traps. So do you see this as a linear progression, and how do you account for these distortions?
Yeah, great question. Thank you so much for that. In the book, in one of the early chapters, we talk about that very thing. Our purpose in creating this chart is to show what it looks like when we're doing it in an integrated way. And what it looks like when it's not an integrated way is you get, low scores in these domains and high scores in those domains. It's just a way of thinking about that whole thing. it's absolutely true that we do not grow in all domains in the same way at the same rate. Yeah, I mean, Einstein was a great example of very integrated, in a lot of ways, very integrated awakening, but we got plenty of examples of very unintegrated awakening. And that's part of what we actually created this chart to help people understand. So that when people see, somebody claiming some glorious subjective awakening, they can be a little, skeptical about all the rest. It's like, okay, cool. You had a nice subjective experience. Now what? What else? What about this? How are you actually in your relationships? Are you some sort of a tormentor? Even though you're like everybody thinks you're the greatest illumined saint on the planet? This A lot of the people that we have thought were great illumined saints were very violent toward the people who were close to them. So yeah, I totally agree with you. Yes, all kinds of shadows come in at all kinds of places. It's amazing how we human beings have these capacities to twist anything in a way that really gets messed up. And it's all because, love is imperfect. Our needs are never perfectly met when we're growing up. We conclude all kinds of stuff that's not true about the world and we believe it. And until we get out of our heads, we'll keep believing it. And I'm not saying, I know I'm not a person who thinks we should stop thinking. I wouldn't say that to the Stoa because that's, this is a group of people who love to think. But I'm saying we need to be aware of the impact of mind as well as the other domains of our being. And we need to be aware of our impact on the people around us. That's also part of the awakening process. So yeah, this is really just, it's kind of like standing back at a forest and saying, trees have stages. They start with sprouts, they have a few leaves, there's a trunk, blah, blah, blah. But, every tree is absolutely unique. That's also true. Every tree has its own gifts. So it's just from that perspective that we create this view, not to get it all locked into thinking it's all linear, because it is so not linear. I think everybody has these experiences of, yeah, 5 steps forward, 4 steps back, 6 steps back, 4 steps forward, like whatever. And it's not just in one domain, right? It's blobby. It's like electron clouds moving around. That's more like what it is. So anyway, yes, totally agreed. I'm just saying that on average, when you stand back far enough, you'll see this pattern. That answer it?
Yes, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Apostle, you have a question.
Hey,
Hey.
so I was curious, how did you build the model? Like, is it based on like doing interviews with people who are on these stages, or did you research texts or other materials like religious texts, or is it based on your own process of going through some of these stages?
So it's based on two basic approaches. One is my experience with myself and a large number of clients over a large number of years, as well as my experience with training spiritual teachers and their clients over many years. So a lot of information came to me from thousands of clients through their teachers to me because I was training these teachers. The other part of it is in the preparation for a course we were building for JFK University in their master's department that had to do with personal development. Uh, we researched a lot of stuff. Obviously, we researched Wilbur and his whole list, and we researched a bunch of spiritual and religious roots documents, which I had been doing since that time I was quite young anyway. And basically, you know, we're not saying we have done the most extensive possible research to produce this. Although recently I've been talking to the various AIs, including my own AI, which uses also other AIs to get information. I've never seen anybody find any fault with this particular thing, including very advanced spiritual teachers. it's not to say that there are, there's many other ways of conceiving of it and talking about these stages and whatever, that's fine. But I think that by gathering up all of this data and combining my experience with lots of people's experience, these patterns have emerged. And some of it has to do with Western psychology stages, you know, Maslow and, Levinger and all of these people, Beck and Cohen. Um, None of that was left out in our consideration of these stages. We were specifically interested in reorganizing these stages according to our view of how people can grow through them, because the stages so far have been mostly heavily weighted toward the lower end of development, where all of the test subjects are. That's where all the data is, right? So that's much easier to say that these first 4, maybe 5 stages have lots of research behind them. And as soon as you start going up above that, the data starts going down rapidly. And so, where that's where we have to start reading into old texts, ancient traditions, and the personal experience of thousands of people in the modern day who have gone beyond some of those earlier stages. So, yeah, that's how we came to it.
So it's kind of a mix of research and anecdotal evidence from clients and clients of clients, basically. Yeah, cool.
Yes. Yeah,
Thank
it's the
you.
best I could cobble together. And I keep trying to make it better, but even the AI doesn't seem to have a suggestion for making it better. And it can read everything.
All right, Mac, you had a, oh, Alex, you want to jump in?
Can I jump in with one? Yeah, kind of based on what you just shared. So, in the years since you developed this and put it out into the world and sort of have been using it, seeing how people receive it, what have you learned about maybe how a model like this is like optimally helpful? Because I've found that a lot of times these models are their own kind of trap. Like people, where am I? And it becomes its own kind of pitfall. But I'm wondering if you've seen that, and just kind of what you've learned from seeing how people use this, and what you would sort of advise as like the best way of making use of something like this as a tool.
Yeah. First of all, I think that the simplest function of this thing is to show us the range of development and make it easier for us to figure out where we are. Because just like GPS, if you know where you are and you know where you're going, it's pretty easy to get there. But if you don't know where you are and you don't know where you're going, how do you even know if you got there? You don't even know. It's like you're wandering around in circles. And this is what's been going on a lot. People wandering around in circles, especially in this day where there's like 10 million dharmas available within 1 second from the internet, from your computer. People are, picking a little of this and a little of that, and it's great. It's actually a really good thing. I think the problem though is that we need to understand the big picture of where we are and where we're going, because when you get that, awakening happens much faster. How do we use that? I train coaches to use this in my iConscious Coaches and Leaders program. We'll probably run one in the spring. But how other people use that, I mean, in coaching, it's so important. This is why Dr. Griggs came to me originally to help do this with me, because in her work coaching, mostly corporate Silicon Valley America, she needed to know what the map was. Where are we going? Where does the coaching take us? And if we don't know where it takes us, then we're slowing the process. So other ways of using it, how do we use this? I got my own ways that I'm going to be using it, that are going to be online, that are going to be, let's say, embedded in the digital world. Unlike many other people, I'm not, negative about everything digital. I am very close to a lot of people who are quite negative about that. And that's just not who I am. I'm fundamentally an optimist. So I think that the uses of this are going to quietly show up in all kinds of places through individual personal work, people understanding where they are, through digital applications online, through coaching, and eventually through larger education initiatives. But everybody's gonna, find their own way. And yeah, when it comes to things getting twisted and dead ends, it's like until we are at we can't really understand what it's like to live in stages that are future for us. We just, intellectually we can sort of get it. And this is a group of guys who could probably, have gifts. That's part of what the mental types are great for. We actually can almost think our way into enlightenment, not completely, but almost. Um, yeah, we can get ourselves tied up into knots no matter what. But I'm just trying to, you know, produce the next best tools we can have that will reduce the downsides. Anyway, I hope that answered.
Any follow-up, Alex?
No, I think that's good. There's like a question brewing, but I don't know how to articulate it, so I want to cede the floor to others.
Great.
So we'll take in Mac in a moment, but the other Alex had his hand up, so I imagine there's something alive for you here.
Yeah, there is. Thank you, Peter. And I didn't know how to frame this as a question, but maybe the question is, was it an epiphany for you to put awakening in the middle rather than at the end? That awakening is just one stage and you're kind of halfway, and there's so much more. So I think the value here is detailing what happens after awakening. Whereas many models, even Carl Jung's individuation, people would see, well, that's the awakening. But here you have individuation as a stage after awakening. Like Nietzsche's Übermensch, people would say, well, that's the summum or integral stage two. But here you're saying, no, after you reach those stages, there's so much more that happens and you kind of detail them. And was that an epiphany or how did that happen?
Um, wow. I think it was, an overall epiphany over many years of exploration. So not a sudden epiphany, just like a constant gradual recognition that words like enlightenment or awakening are really have tended to become baskets for what is really a much bigger process. So we get fucked up by using words and thinking it's all just awakening. So yeah, I use the word awakening there because it's referring to the awakening of consciousness. At stage 7, if you're really in the middle of stage 7, you are permanently knowing that you are the infinite being. You're always knowing that no matter what's going on. Um, but that's just the beginning. Yes, that's right. And people wouldn't know that until they got there and then started noticing that there was more. And so, yeah, it's not just an epiphany, it's also a part of our larger mission to bust these myths because they're messing us up and getting in our way. Yeah, thanks for noticing that. Also, similarly, individuating, we're individuating all the time. We're awakening all the time. But I use these words in those spots, particularly because those spots are very much about us. 7 is very much about the consciousness awakening, or let's say the awakening of the infinite in all of our domains. And 11 is very much about the realization that, oh my God, my whole life is all about me being me uniquely. Now, it's not like nobody's ever had that realization before, but when you get to 11, nothing else matters. You've already had the awakenings. You know you're part of the universe. You know that you and God are part of the same thing. Uh, well, now what? Well, now it's about you being you. Yeah. So anyway, thanks for that.
All right. This might be your last question. Mac, you're up.
Yeah, hi. Nice talk. So I'm not too exactly well endowed with the Stoa, so I don't really know whether I should be kind of like asking more questions or constructive criticism, you could say. But
Whatever you
yeah,
want.
so my understanding of your graph is that it's kind of like Beck and Cohen's like, spiral development, and the inner subjective, outer subjective, that's pretty much, Ken Wilber's four quadrants. Um, and then, yeah, and then the other part I'm really asking about is really just how you kind of define mind, emotions, body, Yeah, and you seem to use the words awareness and attention kind of almost interchangeably, because in science they're very, very it's kind of scrutinized,
Mhm.
especially the word attention, especially in AI development. The word attention in AI modeling is very different, and same with motions. Construction of motion theory and stuff like that are pretty. And they cross over with linguistics a little bit. So defining them is pretty still scrutinized very heavily. I'm wondering how you kind of came to those definitions.
Thank you for asking. And to me, our definitions of words are incredibly important. We need to be highly discerning because a lot of, well, spiritual and personal development language gets fuzzy and mushes things together that don't belong together. And it doesn't help out. So, yeah, what I mean by consciousness is the level of universal being that is just aware and aware of existing and registering what's happening. That's it. So you could also call that awareness. Now, what if we think about the word attention, to me, that is a sort of personal beam of like a flashlight beam of consciousness coming through us and focusing on a particular object. So before I go any further, how does that jive with your definitions?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's pretty interesting. I'm not too grounded per se in what consciousness literature is or attention literature too much, but um, uh, I mean, part of it is consciousness. I think also kind of manifests itself in kind of like form of perception. So, who's kind of conscious, who isn't conscious, right? Is if only humans are conscious, then does only humans have like, the spatial awareness get counted as consciousness? Or does kind of uh 2D awareness, like a two-dimensional reasoning, stuff like that. So, or kind of, I'm kind of referencing media theory here, and then like uh, more of like, the Tetris effect, where people who kind of play Tetris all day, when they have dreams, they see blocks rather than words. So, kind of like discerning how the shape, you could say, of consciousness is, doesn't necessarily, I mean, that really has to be woven into the definition because, uh, you know, when people switch languages, they think in new languages, right? Or when they maybe play video games a lot or interact with VR a lot, they tend to think in that new medium. So I don't know necessarily if that, um, yeah, I mean, you have to explain that a little bit.
Okay, well, that's a whole other thing I'm not sure we can get too deep into, but I do want to say that uh, consciousness, in my experience, both is completely shapeless and takes the shape of everything. There's your answer to that one. Good luck with figuring that out. But that's how I experience it. So let me go on to the other definitions. By what I mean by uniqueness is what makes each person unique. So, for instance, I sort of was born with a fairly balanced left and right brain. That makes me kind of unique. That gives me this ability to take views like this. And it therefore results in me bringing unique things forward into the world. And everybody, in my opinion, is unique and has unique things to bring forward into the world. So that's all I need, all I really mean about uniqueness. So the model is tracking how we grow in these departments. And what I mean by growth in consciousness, it's not like consciousness is increasing in the universe. It's just the growth of our perception of consciousness. And so we go through these stages of recognition where we get, oh, there's something beyond. Like when I was a little kid, I felt like I was being watched by some heavenly host. And I sort of pictured this as like a choir of angels because that's the closest I could come. Later on, I started having my own experiences of consciousness. At first, my first major experience of consciousness was nirvikalpa samadhi, just formless absorption in the absolute. This is a very immature realization of consciousness because we're so absorbed in it that we can't maintain awareness of all the other domains at the same time. And then it goes on. Then we realize, oh, there's a kind of an empty brightness to this thing. And then we realize, yeah, it's permeating everything. And then we realize it's me. And it's not just me on the level of consciousness. It's actually me in my body. It's everything. And it goes on. And then we realize that everything that seems manifest is completely, and always has been, absolutely unified with everything that is unmanifest. So there are these stages. So in the uniqueness department, we just go through stages of recognition that we are unique, our uniqueness matters. Yeah, there were times when belonging seems to matter more, that we have to grapple with that. We go through these stages of cutting off parts of our uniqueness in order to survive. And then eventually we realize we have to get them back again, because after all, I got to be me. So anyway, that's the uniqueness thing. Eventually there's nothing stopping you from being your unique self. Nothing on the inside. And if things on the outside try, whatever, they do what they want. Mind. What I mean by mind is everything that the mind does: thinking, symbolizing, planning, calculating trajectories, things like that. Mind is awesome, looking at all sides of things, believing things, constructing beliefs of all kinds, highly complex and some very simple, and everything in between. That's what I mean by mind. There's nothing wrong with mind. We just go through stages of development where we are more and more using our mind until we get to the point of realizing that, oh, it's not just mind. Part of our evolution of mind is realizing that mind isn't the whole thing. And then later on, we realize that that our thoughts are expressions of universal intelligence moving through us, our uniqueness, to create new configurations. One way to say it. So it's all beautiful how this intelligence works with us and through us. And we go through these stages. And eventually we get to stages some people call illumined mind or things like that. Yeah, those things happen. We eventually get to a place where we use our mind to serve our personal unique purpose. And outside of that, we don't misuse it. Like I train my people to learn how to get out of their mind, stop thinking, and just directly experience life. If we can do that and be awake in consciousness and on all of these other levels of our being, then we can function really well. Emotions, all of the feelings, all of the ways that we have our emotional and energetic responses to life: anger, pain, sadness, happiness, fear. All of these are part of our emotional life. Years ago when I was working on the Loving AI project, I undertook a project to write down all of the feeling words that I could find. Because why? Because at the time, the emotional recognition software was working on like 5 major emotions. That's it. And it'll show you on the screen what it thinks is going on with you. Not very accurately back then, especially. Barely accurately now. But our emotions are super important. They tell us what matters to us. If we're pissed, why are we pissed? We're pissed because somebody's abusing us or somebody we care about. If somebody loves us, that matters. We want to be loved. We want to love other people. Everything that has to do with how we interact with life must include our emotions. And if it does not, the awakening process gets seriously damaged. I know, I'm a brainy guy. I went through that. I really needed to marry a deeply emotional being to get this piece. Major piece. Anyway, a little bit, I'm just ranting. So emotions, that's what I mean by emotions. And body, I just mean the physical body and everything about how it functions all gets classified under the body. It's Yeah. So, and as we grow in our awareness of what are the limits and what are not the limits of this body. What does this body like to do? What's good for this body? What's bad for this body? How much do I care about being this body? How much do I want to be this body? And how much do I just want to be a disembodied floating spirit in the world? If that's up to me, that gets in the way of whole being awakening. That prevents embodied awakening. But so to me, the endpoint of embodiment, of the embodied awakening process, is we are fully awake to this unique body. We love being this body, and we are not interested in being anything else but this body doing its thing in the world. So that's what we're measuring, and that's what these 5 domains are about. Did that answer your question?
Well, I mean, there's a lot to follow up. But I once again, I don't, this is um there's a lot of kind of like details, fine tuning there.
Yes.
On my, and so I guess some things I guess you could maybe add to yours or kind of like filter in would be first of all, emotions or well, actually, many things, but one of them is the universality you mentioned about consciousness and awareness, you could say, and kind of like this. Then you kind of have to, I guess, explain that. Well, where did we come from? So if we kind of emerge out of kind of cells, did we have this kind of consciousness awareness while we were cells? If we emerge as cells out of atoms, did we kind of emerge this consciousness, kind of have this infallible substrate of throughout, the universe and stuff like that. So that's and then if that's true, then would this kind of like model apply to cellular development, animals, bacteria, stuff like that, viruses, and so that's kind of maybe needs a lot more detail. And another one would be
Mac, I'm
for
just gonna jump in. We're gonna have to close relatively shortly, so maybe you
okay.
can kind of like land your share and then a quick response from Ted, and then we'll close
Yeah,
up.
and then okay, construction of motion theory, Lisa Feldman Barrett, Northeastern University. Motions are not necessarily kind of innate per se, you could say. They're more of just like a reference. So maybe one could really interpret it as a reference to our biological priors, like desires, and then that also goes into cultural development of how we all express emotions and feel emotions completely differently. So they're not really um, nobody has the exact same emotions every time. They're completely individualized every time. Which, and you mentioned the 5 kind
Hey,
of
Mac,
general emotions.
I was going to jump in. Ted, do you have any quick response before we close? Because we have to close out
Yeah.
soon.
Yeah, you're bringing up all kinds of interesting stuff that it's not my specialty, and I'm not that kind of scientist, so I don't get into that kind of stuff usually. What interests me is how human beings relate to these levels of their own being and integrate them in their own personal development process. Yeah, so those other things will be great someday to get more and more deeply into. So thanks so much for having me, you guys. I love having opportunities to rant, and I obviously took this one to rant. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming, Ted. Alex, any parting words or closing thoughts on your end before we close down?
Yeah, just to thank everyone who came. Thank you, Ted, Peter, and then to also recommend people to reach out to Ted, tedstrauss.com. I think he offers kind of free intro chats that I would take him up on. I remember the first chat I had with him, he like read my human design, interviewed me a little bit, like placed me on the model, and it was very high signal, high value single conversation. So anyone who's kind of has their interest peaked, I would say reach out to Ted and yeah, that's my closing thought. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
And thanks, Alex, for introducing me to Ted and Ted's work. Yeah, check out his book. Got his book right here, High Consciousness, Accelerating Human Potential. And we have one more session at the Stoa to close out the kind of the summer. This is happening this Wednesday. Tim Reed, Walking Shadows, Archetype and Psyche in Crisis and Growth. We're talking about high archetypal penetrance, which might complement this session. So check out that at thestoa.ca. So that being said, Ted, Alex, everyone, thanks so much for coming
Yeah.
to today.
Thank you so much.